Well, it's another even-numbered episode, so you know what that means. It's time for another In Defence Of, and this time it's our lovely Liam Maloney who'll be leading the way. Liam, tell us what we're defending this time.
Well, rather than tell you what I'm defending, I'm gonna let it speak for itself.
Fair enough.
What do Frank Sinatra,
Doody-dooby-doo,
Kiss,
Whoa!
the Cookie Monster,
Hello!
and Ethel Merman
Wow!
all have in common? No? Okay. Have you ever heard of Francis Grasso, David Mancuso, Nicky Siano, or Francois Kevorkian? In that case, how about polyester suits, mirror balls, Studio 54, and the Bee Gees? Yep, you guessed it. Disco. Disco, that great hulking musical dumping ground of the late 70s. Even today it's hard to think about disco without instantly reverting to stereotypes like the tacky Saturday Night Fever, Sarah Brightman's ode to her interstellar lover, Boney M's musical history lesson on Tsarist Russia, or even 70s porn stars with dreadful teeth moaning seductively over some wacka wacka guitar. Yep, it's disco. It's D, dreadful. It's I, insincere. It's S, superficial. It's C, commercialist. And it was O, over in the blink of an eye. But why was disco so hated and maligned? And why to this very day do we still look back at it and scoff? I reckon the time has come to redeem it. It's awesome music with a great message and was the most important musical revolution since the birth of rock and roll. Disco, unlike a load of other musical genres, actually has a start date. It's got a whopping great cross on the calendar where you can say, this is when it started. And it's in the wee small hours of Saturday the 28th of June 1969, the start of the infamous Stonewall riots. Stonewall is fully responsible for disco. Until Stonewall, it was completely illegal for two people of the same gender to dance together. Heaven forbid, what will happen if two blokes actually dance together?
What he means is Old Testament, Mr. Mayor. Real wrath of God type stuff.
Exactly.
Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes, the dead rising from the grave.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria. Enough, I get the point.
Anyway, you get the idea. Stonewall changes all of that. Because of the riots and the gay liberation movement, the moronic, conservative, homophobic laws slowly get repealed, and it's finally okay to grind on another dude in public.
And you two motherfuckers need Jesus.
Post-Stonewall, there's a vacuum. There's loads of black and Latino gay guys no longer having the shit kicked out of them by cops, with absolutely nowhere to go and dance and pick up dudes, save for Francis Grasso's hedonistic wonderland, Salvation. Salvation wasn't the first discotheque that dubious honour either goes to Paris's Whiskey A Go-Go in 47 or Regine's in 53, but Grasso's Salvation was the birth of a different kind of discotheque. DJs, beat matching, queer sensibilities, and some good old-fashioned hedonism with a load of sex and drugs.
I apologise for nothing.
But even with a delicious buffet of newly liberated gay blokes, drugs, and sex almost on tap, Salvation didn't last that long. The place closes in 72. And although he's now recognised as a pioneering DJ, Grasso was more or less forgotten for a very long time. Introducing David Mancuso's Love Saves the Day parties, hosted in his loft apartment on Broadway. Continuing Francis Grasso's experiment in total freedom and creativity and generating the perfect party, Mancuso DJs to anyone who appears at his home, usually the same kind of crowd that was appearing at Salvation, black, Latino, and let's not forget about it, gay. Mancuso plays a mixture of soul and rhythm and blues, and even kind of danceable gospel at times. Here's a heavy hitter from Mancuso's loft parties. A few years later, across town, Nicky Siano's Gallery opens, following the same idea and the same sound. But disco? Where is that? Everything here sounds like funk and it sounds like soul and it's R&B. No one said the word boogie once, and there's no spandex to be seen.
Let it rain, let it rain, let it rain, let it rain. It's gonna rain, yeah. Oh, no. It's gonna rain, yeah. Oh, no. I don't want it to rain.
Sorry to break it to you. This is disco. It's not all about the music. It's about dancing. It's about having a good time. It's about liberation. It's freedom. It's emancipation. And it's really queer.
From home now. I'm a long way from home. So
let's jump forward to 1976. This underground gay disco thing is becoming big, big business. And just like every kid had a garage rock band in the 60s, and just like how everyone became a hippie immediately after Woodstock, the disco fad started to grip the nation like a clawing, horrifying, thumping monster with glitter and platform shoes. Disco becomes a sound that we start to hear creeping into more and more music, and within 12 months, Studio 54 has opened and is attracting random celebs like Truman Capote, Andy Warhol in a wig that defies explanation, random Arabic royalty, a very naked Grace Jones, and Diana Ross with an arse full of cocaine. Studio 54, even though it's held up as the pinnacle of disco, might actually be the first nail in disco's coffin. It kind of seems appropriate that the first track ever played at the opening night of Studio 54 was CJ & Company's Devil's Gun. As a result, a million other suburban discos open across the globe, playing the same hits as one another with this stylized, almost homogenized disco sound. Because of the excesses of Studio 54 and the umpteen low-rent suburban knockoffs, it becomes associated with everything that's superficial and commercial. It's style over substance with no moral core and no talent. Disco wasn't even a scene anymore, it was an infection. It was the sonic equivalent of pubic lice, and once you caught it, it was a real bastard to get rid of. There's a shampoo you can get from the chemist, and you need one of them kind of special combs as well, apparently. No one was immune to this spreading horror. Beyond soul stars like Diana Ross, The Miracles, and the Jackson 5 going disco, they were certainly at the more palatable end, many others fell prey to the seductive thump-thump of the kick drum. Rock bands like Blondie, Wings, the Rolling Stones, and even the monochromatic leather queens themselves, Kiss, all went disco. It got worse when Ethel Merman reworked her old classics as disco.
There's no business like show business, like no business I know.
or when Cookie Monster gets the disco treatment courtesy of Robin Gibb on the Sesame Street Fever album.
C is for cookie, that's good enough for me. Yeah, C is for cookie, that's good enough for me.
Maybe the one that stings the most is when one of the manliest male role models of all time goes disco and massacres his own classic version of Night and Day.
Night and day, you are the one. Only you need the moon under the sun.
Oh, Frank, what were you thinking?
Whether near to me or far.
But something was gonna give soon. We needed freeing from the quote-unquote feminizing and queering influence of disco. Because let's not forget, after the disco wave hit, straight white guys were expected to dance. But cometh the hour, cometh the man. The year is 1979, and the man is Steve Dahl, DJ for Chicago's WLUP Loop rock station. Steve Dahl is annoyed with disco. It's taken over the airwaves, the clubs, and he's even lost his old job when the last station he was at went disco. Time for something to change. So like a typical SJW, he decides to organise a protest called Disco Demolition Night at the Chicago White Sox home ground. He invites all his little reprobate listeners to come down, bring disco records with them, and they'll blow them up right then and there in the middle of the field. Sounds like a good idea, decent publicity stunt, fair due to the guy. You hate disco, blow that thing up.
Well, listen, we took all the disco records that you brought tonight. We got them in a giant box, and we're going to blow them up real good. Now, it's because of you that this is happening tonight, okay? Not because of us. We're merely a vehicle for your thoughts. Disco sucks! Disco sucks! Disco sucks! Disco sucks! And we're never going to let them forget it! They're not going to shove it down our throats!
50,000 rockers get bongoed on what passes for beer in America, get down to the stadium, and at the appropriate hour, invade the pitch. They riot, they set fire to stuff, and generally behave like colossal dickheads. People are arrested, people are taken to hospital, the park is trashed, and the night is cancelled, the next game's written off. All goes wrong. But even if it's just a bit of harmless roughhousing, the die is cast. Everyone sees this moment as an omen of the coming storm. Record labels start to dump their disco artists, radio stations start to abandon the disco format and return to their previous programming. But because of their boom and bust mentality and immediately dumping disco at the first sign of any trouble, the record industry loses a whopping 11% of sales in a year. And to add insult to injury, they actually blame disco for creating a false economic bubble. 11%! That's huge! If anyone did that today, entire economies would collapse. There'd be a run on the pound and we'd end up like that scene in It's a Wonderful Life. But instead of money, it's disco, and instead of banks, it's record shops, and instead of Jimmy Stewart, it's like 50,000 racist, homophobic rock fans. Yeah, something like that.
Now, we can get through this thing all right. We've got to stick together, though. We've got to have faith in each other.
Looking back, it's kind of hard to ignore some of the underlying tensions. Many people have said the thing was incredibly racially motivated and was homophobic in the extreme. Disco fags and other words that are a bit too far gone for even me to say. I'll let Vince Lawrence explain this one to you.
It was more about blowing up all this nigger music than, destroying disco.
Steve Dahl maintains he's not homophobic, but immediately after the events of Disco Demolition Night, he's quoted as saying,
Midwesterners didn't want that intimidating lifestyle shoved down their throats.
Nelson George sums it up really nicely.
And the disco backlash was definitely somewhat triggered by homophobia. Disco became associated with constituencies that weren't quote unquote mainstream, which was, black audiences, Latino audiences, and gay audiences. Mainstream rock audiences rejected a lot of those audiences on a racial, cultural tip. Look at it, disco sucks. Think about what they're talking about. I mean, it's kind of a coded anti-gay, phrase.
It's all well and good looking back and reading it like this, but at the time, barely anybody actually mourned the death of disco. One article in Gay Left, called In Defense of Disco, comes to its defense in the aftermath of Disco Demolition Night. No one else bats an eyelid or sheds a tear at the passing of this massive musical homunculus. In hindsight, there probably was too much disco around, and too much of anything is kinda hard to swallow. I won't make the obvious blowjob joke, but if you can make it past the scrap heap of festering novelty songs like Disco Duck and YMCA, disco gave us thousands of great songs. Unless we forget, a great song is a great song, regardless who wrote it, and regardless what style it's in. I can point to so many examples. There's Lolita Holloway's Hit and Run, TJM's I Don't Need No Music, Let No Man Put Asunder by First Choice,
Donna Summer's entire singles catalogue, Evelyn Champagne King's Shame,
Candy Stanton's version of Nights on Broadway, the Shep Pettibone mix of Gonna Get Over You by France Jolie, Coming to You Live by Charles Aaron, Loose Changes, Straight from the Heart, Gene Harsbury Love,
every one of them is an absolute killer. But apparently, they're automatically shit because they're disco. It's a crying shame that with all these incredible tracks out there, the only time we now get to hear disco is at your auntie's 60th at the local Labour club. It's always the same old bullshit canon of popular disco hits from the likes of the Swedish neutrality-maintaining Magnolia-painted Barrett Home Key Party soundtracking ABBA, and the gravity-defyingly coiffed beard peddlers themselves, the Bee Gees. All this sandwiched between a disappointingly cold buffet, that creepy uncle nobody wants to speak to, and a less than rousing sing-along to Dexy's Ear Cancer Come On Eileen, generally leaves me urgently wishing for the sweet embrace of the tomb. Disco was beautiful, it was interesting, it was creative, it was protest music, and it was fun. We just never get to hear that. Instead, we trot out the usual family favourites like some repetitive sonic lobotomy.
Anybody could be that guy.
Alright, that's enough of that. Disco wasn't just a sexual, gay rights liberation kind of thing, though. When you look at other revolutions like rock and roll, they come from something so simple as turning up a guitar too loud. Distortion's the very essence of rock and roll. For disco, that revolution was even more primitive. It was tribal, it was animal, and it was sexy. And it sounded like this. That four-to-the-floor kick drum became the most important rhythm in the world, and still is to this very day. Disco created it, it sanctioned it, and it sanctified it. We were allowed to finally stomp and jump around and lose it without ever losing the beat. Disco gave us an incredible musical legacy. Yes, rock and roll gave us giant electric sonic penis extensions, but disco taught us how to thrust. And, as we all know, it ain't the size of your instrument, it's how well you groove with it. After the spectacular crash of an entire genre in '79, disco became a dirty word. Even the Penguin Encyclopedia of Popular Music had this as its definition of disco in the 1990 edition.
It was a dance fad of the 1970s with a profound and unfortunate influence on popular music because the main thing was the do-do-do beat. Other values could be ignored. Producers used drum machines, synthesizers and other gimmicks at the expense of musical values.
How bitchy is that? But you want to know a secret? Disco never died. Yes, the trash like Ethel Merman's disco album will be forever consigned to the bargain bin of history, along with Queen's unfortunate Backchat and Elton John's abysmal effort in Victim of Love. But all that was just faddy copycat rubbish anyway. Real disco never died. All those people who were dancing to disco when it started carried on dancing after its supposed death. Those gay subcultures kept their soundtrack. They just called it dance music instead, and opened even better, more decadent, more legendarily wild clubs like the Paradise Garage, the Saint, and the infamous Warehouse. That thump, thump, thump of disco spread to every single country across the globe. Disco's DNA is everywhere. And there are still people out there beating that original disco drum, like Joey Negro, Al Kent, Greg Wilson, Bill Brewster. Since about 2009, it's sort of been revived under this horrible banner of either new disco or future disco. But they're a poor shadow of what disco was. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't actually need disco anymore. Everyone's favourite UK firebrand DJ Bill Brewster says disco and gay liberation run in close parallel. And he's totally right. I am totally free to dance with whatever blokes I can con into my less than enticing web, and I won't be arrested for it. Shocking, I know. That's in no small part thanks to disco. And like I said before, disco is about having a good time. It's liberation, it's freedom, it's emancipation, and it's dirty, and it's deviant, and it's underground, and it's sexy, and it's kind of about community and loving people. Above all else, disco is about dancing.
Pretty much.
Because I know Matthew, you've never particularly been, shall we say, a proponent of disco.
No, I've disliked, but in my defence of me.
You have one message. First message received August 15th at 5:12 p.m.
Dude, your voicemail woman's really terse. Hey, mate, it's Matt. Listen, just a quick one. I've just found out something quite peculiar that I think you'd appreciate. You know the Tango adverts when we were growing up? The one that got banned where an orange man came around and slapped someone around the face. Do you remember the "you know when you've been tangled" voice? Do you know what it was? That was Gil Scott-Heron. How mad is that? Anyway, just thought you'd like that. Listen, do us a favour. Drop us a line about the 10th. Speak to you soon, mate. Bye-bye.
You have one message.
Hi, mate. I'm in Manchester. I'm kind of wandering around a bit. A bit bleary-eyed. Had a few too many sherbets yesterday. And I just got your message, and I was kind of Googling frantic. I was like, no, there's no fucking way. So I watched one of the adverts on YouTube. And I was like, no, this motherfucker's having me on. It's some scout who's kind of doing the voiceover. And it gets to the end, and then that kind of lovely, sexy, mellifluous gravel voice comes on. I was like, no fucking way. Whatever bizarre meeting happened in the Tango boardroom that says, let's get the most outspoken black man in all of poetry to... I don't understand. And I can't. Nope. Yeah.
To return the call, you have one message.
What's even weirder about this is just kind of struck me. This is the third time the Gil Scott-Heron has cropped up in my world in the past 24 hours. Yesterday on the train down to London, I've been working on this mixed version of, what do you call it, Revolution Will Not Be Televised, sort of this hip-hop thing that I'm working on. Then while I'm down in London, listening to a story about where the tune White Is on the Moon came from, and it's to do with this certain group that NASA funded to build, to look at kind of the viability of building colonies in outer space at a location called Lagrange Point 5. Yeah. And now discovering that Gil Scott Heron is the Tango Man. Yeah, just a strange fucking world. See you later.
To return the call at your normal call rate, press hash. To listen to the message again, press 1. To save the message, press 2. To delete the message, press 3. To receive message deleted. End of messages.